According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in 2017, more people died from firearm injuries in the United States than any other year since at least 1968. Gun control, is it too late, or is there still a chance to create some semblance of responsible gun ownership in this country? We've heard it before, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and the meaning of these words has evaded us almost from the very beginning. Today on the program, we're focusing on gun control. Today, our guests are Executive Director of the Georgia Coalition for Safe Communities, Dorothy Leone Glasser, and Georgia State Representative Derek Jackson from District 64. Thank you both for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Now, we've heard that Second Amendment quote time and time again, the right of the people to bear arms and all shall not be infringed. And I guess to start this discussion, I want to kind of get an idea of, I know we don't know, I mean, courts don't know what the heck that means and all, but in your mind, what did the framers mean when they said, it seems like they're saying pretty much, don't touch the guns. You have a perfect right to have them. Derek, Representative Jackson, let's start with you. What do you think the framers' intent was?
So I think the early framers' intent was basically to give you the ability to protect yourself and to protect your property. Right, and that's how I interpret it as well as a lawmaker. You know, when I think about the Second Amendment, it doesn't mean stand your ground. It doesn't mean enabling teachers to have a gun while they're teaching our children. Second Amendment was strictly when you're at home and, you know, you have someone that, you know, basically come into your house uninvited. You have the right to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. That's how I interpret the Second Amendment.
Dorothy, your take?
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think, though, it's very individual. Mm-hmm. I think, like the representative said, it's not about other people, other than our law enforcement and our military take care of us as well, and they use guns. But this was an individual mandate that, as individual citizens of the United States, that we had a right to protect ourselves, to protect our families, and protect our belongings. But I also think that there is a piece of that that says law abiding. Mm-hmm. That's very important, and we can't forget that. And that's why we have certain things in place, licensing, background checks. All of these things are in place so that we stay law abiding as we are owning our guns and taking on that responsibility.
You know, it strikes me as so ironic. I mean, when you were talking, and I think about people and what they say about the Second Amendment, how they very easily can broaden the meaning to things like stand your ground, mm-hmm. think that it means that. But these very same people who call themselves strict constructionists, who mm-hmm. say that the Constitution means exactly what it says, narrow rights when it comes to other issues. So it's very ironic that they can use the Second Amendment and broaden it to include assault guns and all of this mm-hmm. stuff, stand your ground laws, all of that. But then when it comes to things like, you know, privacy, oh no, the Constitution doesn't say anything about that. It's like, you know, so it's
right.
It's an interesting dichotomy there in this conversation that we have.
And I think you're right. And it's even on steroids right now in this political climate that we're in, right? Everybody's going to retreat to their own corners, and so we're so hyper political, and so what we need to do is sort of reset the conversation so we can have a more sensible, civil conversation around these topics that are very sensitive. And the Second Amendment is one, gun control, which I typically don't call it gun control because that immediately puts your defenses up. Someone's going to control my gun. So that's not the case. It's about public safety. It's about public health. And we all have a right, especially government, at all three levels, federal, state, and local, to make sure that all citizens can live, work, and play without having to fear that someone's going to use their gun just because they can.
Now, that's something when we were talking earlier that you said that to even start the conversation, it's important to frame it in the right way. And as you said, when people hear gun control, for a lot of them, they shut down immediately, so they don't hear anything that comes after. So if you try and start the narrative on gun violence, public health, any other thing like that, they've shut down when they hear control.
Advocates for Responsible Care is the lead for the Georgia Coalition for Safe Communities. We particularly call ourselves that because that is what our focus is. It is a focus of making our communities, all the people in our communities, all the stakeholders that make up our communities as safe and as healthy as possible. So for us, the framework has to be a public health framework in order when you're looking at gun safety and you're looking at the health and well-being of the people in communities, you have to look at public health. What are we doing with this issue in terms of public health in Georgia to address it?
Is there a way that we can put this back in the box, or however, this genie back in the whatever, to actually get to a form of responsible gun ownership? I mean, can that actually happen in this country, given the scenario? I mean, given our history, all of this.
I think the short answer is yes. I refuse to think that this is our new normal. And as a matter of fact, after every incident, every mass shooting incident, you clearly see the public, over 80% of them agree along with that we need to have some sort of common sense gun laws to make sure that we do have a civil society and that we look at the public health the way we should. Case in point, mental health. Every incident with a gun doesn't deal with a mental health situation. As a matter of fact, some of the subject matter experts that I spoke with, they said 93% of those who need mental health behavior help, they're getting it. So that means that 93%, they're safe. They know what medications they need. They need what kind of stress coping strategies to implement to help them mitigate their situation. The other 7% could potentially be dangerous, right? But there are some triggers that requires it. And so the question is, law enforcement, are they trained to be able to see and how to respond properly? I mean, we're dealing with a case right now over on the other side of Georgia in DeKalb where a military veteran, completely nude, is no longer with us because a law enforcement killed him because they thought that this person was dangerous. And so that should never be the case.
But so does that, though, confuse the issue when we, like, lump all of when we lump, like, what happens with police officers and killing, and when we lump, like, the mass shootings, when we lump all of that together in this narrative about gun control or gun safety and all of that, doesn't that confuse the issue? Because, I mean, people don't want to hear. I mean, you've got people thinking like, oh, police officers are supposed to have guns. They're supposed to protect and all of that. But, I mean, isn't that another side of, like, the issue of what we're talking about when we're saying private citizens and guns, or what?
So it does become convoluted when we do add everything, which is the reason why I always stress with everyone every time we have a conversation around guns, let's compartmentalize every topic, right? So, for example, as you started off, we started talking about the Second Amendment.
Right.
I don't even think this is a Second Amendment conversation. This is really about public health. When we send our children off to school in a conducive learning environment, as a concerned parent, you don't want your teachers to be equipped with a gun. That's sort of like something doesn't belong here, right? And so we just want to make sure that when we have the conversation, let's not add everything in the basket. If you want to talk about Second Amendment, talk about Second Amendment. If you want to talk about assault rifles, then let's talk about assault rifles. Because not all firearms can do the same thing as an assault rifle, right? And so when you have these mass shootings what is the kind of conversation? Are we going to exercise political courage to do the right thing? Because as my 15-year-old would say, there's never a wrong time to do the right thing.
Right.
And we tend to always have these conversations after mass shootings, but after about 2 or 3 months, it sort of dies off.
down. Yeah.
I think we should always be thinking about this because tens of thousands of deaths occur every year in the United States, typically more than those who die of cancer.
Right.
And so this should be alarming to us all. We don't need to have a Sandy Hook case in Georgia before we respond and be preemptive and be proactive to prevent that kind of situation in Georgia.
But don't we kind of get into this like circular kind of like situation where it's like if we don't know what the Second Amendment means, then we don't know how to write laws so that we can, address the safety issues and public health issues and all of that. I mean, doesn't it have to start with like understanding like how to draft laws that regulate guns and all of that, or we don't really have to get to that to address public safety issues?
I don't think so. I think what we need is a public health framework to gather the data for Georgia. The CDC was allocated $50 million to look again at gun research. It had been taken away from them a few years ago, and now we just allocated that back to them. And the NIH will also be doing gun control and gun violence data. However, that doesn't tell us what's happening in Georgia. We have to be able to get into the communities of Georgia that are a high risk for gun violence. That includes domestic violence, that includes all areas of violence that are affecting our communities. And until we really gather that data, we can't address Second Amendment, we can't address assault weapons, we can't address mental health, we can't address behavioral illnesses, we can't address the economic impact of this and the impact on our children. 7 children die every day in Georgia from a gun-related incident.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. That seems really, really high.
And since 2014 to 2019, there have been almost 11,000 gun-related deaths in Georgia alone.
So when we're categorizing gun violence, because I know that the majority of deaths related to guns is suicide, caused by suicide and all.
Yes.
So when we're talking gun violence, are we including that data as well with suicide?
Because with suicide from the age of 10 to 18 is the second highest incident in the United States for gun-related suicide with teenagers. So we are not taking care of our children.
And I know something that I read too that's related to that, and there are the studies that show that for developed countries, the countries with fewer guns have fewer suicides.
Yes.
Right.
Less
Because
suicide.
a gun in the house, the CDC has data that a gun in the house will increase the likelihood of suicide related to gun.
We as lawmakers, the public is asking us to do the right thing, right? Nearly 80% saying in the latest polls that we should have background check.
Right.
We have background checks and everything else, right? And so going back to your question, the Second Amendment is not the starting place. I agree with Dorothy. As a matter of fact, when we do write legislation, we don't consult the Constitution, right? Me and my colleagues don't go, what does the Constitution know?
Right.
We let our general counsel make sure that we don't violate, one, the Georgia Constitution and the United States Constitution, but we don't start there. We look at, what is it that's best for our constituents? What's best for Georgia as a whole? Because sometimes, we got 159 counties. What may be best for one county may be not, adversely impact or negatively impact another county. So we do look at that from, 2 different lenses, from a district and as a state.
Okay, we'll stop right there and we're going to take a break, but we'll be back. I'm Angie Wright-Reeves. We're talking gun control today. We'll be back in just a moment. Hi, I'm Angie Wright Reeves, and we're back on Law and Society. We're talking gun control today with Dorothy Leone Glasser and Representative Derek Jackson. Now, I want to talk about some of the laws that are already on the books or not on the books right now in Georgia. Okay, the state permit, is there a state permit required to purchase in Georgia? No. For long guns, no for handguns, not at all.
No.
Firearm registration?
No.
No. Assault weapon law?
No.
No. Magazine capacity restriction?
No.
And for people who don't understand that, that's how these mass shootings are able to happen because they can have like, what, 50 or however many
varies.
bullets
It
in a...
depends on what type of assault.
whatever.
That's right.
Okay. Is there an owner license required?
Nope.
Nope. There is a permit required to carry concealed weapons, though.
That's right.
For
That is
both.
correct.
And what about open carry?
That's correct.
There's one for handguns, but there's no permit for long guns.
That's correct.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. Background checks required for private sales.
Nope. Nope. And here's the reason why. Unfortunately, because Georgia is one of those states still that is pro-gun owner. But what does that really define? That define as you can have a sale between person A and person B, and it would never go through our system. No background checks were done. They're not breaking any kind of laws. You can have a gun convention here,
Right.
which a couple of years ago we did, and we had 88,000 people over the weekend of this gun convention. Were there transactions? Absolutely, but we have no visibility.
So wait, you could buy the guns there
Yes.
and then
Yes.
just walk out with
Yeah.
it?
Yes.
And you don't have to
Trade.
like
That's exactly
no
right.
account, no
No.
record.
And there's no way of differentiating that the person that's purchasing this gun is a law-abiding citizen or a gang member, right? Or have
Or
a
a felon.
felony, right? There's a reason why.
So aren't there federal laws though that require some of this stuff? Like, I mean, can felons or people with felonies or priors and stuff buy guns in Georgia?
But again,
Or what?
think about your first 4 or 5 questions.
Right.
I answered in no, right? And
So it
there's-
doesn't matter with whom.
So as you have these loopholes in place, Angie, until you tighten down these loopholes, then you can really enforce both the federal and state laws. But until you close